We're doing 7 minutes or 6 minutes?
6 minutes. 6 minutes and 4. Okay. Justin, before we get started, please introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Justin Shu. I'm going to be your Prime Minister today.
Everybody introduce themselves just so they know who you are.
Okay, and I'm Josie Cruiser, and I'm your member of government.
I'm Harrison Melton. I'll be the leader of the opposition.
And I'm Joshua Shi. I'll be your member of opposition.
All right, if everyone's ready. I've played plenty of video games within my lifetime, and that shows that there is some value to them. There are some instances in which video games can be good and beneficial to you, but that's not what this debate is about. What this debate asks us to do is analyze the total costs and the total benefits of video games and see at the end of the day which one outweighs the other. And that's why at the end of the day, my partner and I believe that on balance, video games do more harm than good. Before I get into the argumentation of my case today, I want to begin with some resolutional analysis in order to clarify under what scope we'll be debating here. So you can write this down as in current state. Again, in current state. When we're debating about the effects of video games and what happens when we play video games, we need to be examining the impact of video games as they are within their current state. So right now, when we look at video games, what is happening with video games? How often do people play them? My opponents might get up and talk about the optimal usage of video games. They might say, well, if people just play video games a small amount of time, then it would be beneficial. Those arguments would not be relevant because we need to be looking at video games as they are in their current state right now. So let's go ahead and move on to a sort of measuring stick in order to determine what we should be examining to determine which side of the resolution is true. This is essentially a value, that of individual well-being. Again, individual well-being. Essentially, the statement and the position of the government team is this. Whichever side can show you that video games best impacts to or best upholds the idea of individual well-being should be the one that wins this round. What if video games have more harm than good on individual well-being, then the resolution is true. If the converse is true, then the resolution is false. With that in mind, I'm going to have a few justifications or just simply arguments for you today, discussing the specific harms of video games and how those impacts the general populace. The first justification is that of increased violence. Again, increased violence. This is probably the most famous and controversial one. The idea that playing violent video games will lead to people actually committing acts of violence. And so when we make a claim like this, we need to be ensuring that it's backed up by evidence. And so I'm going to cite to you an actual meta-analysis that was done of 24 different studies examining 17,000 different people. And what they found was that for adolescents ages 9 through 19, and this study was done between 2010 and 2017, playing violent video games led to increased aggression, or it increased the chance that individuals would commit aggressive acts. I believe the specific example that was cited was actually this. If you actually played these violent video games, you were twice as likely to get sent to the principal's office for getting into a fight at your school, or different behaviors such as that. What they also found was that these video games led to increased aggression, and led to these individuals participating in riskier behaviors, such as having drug addictions or driving recklessly, things like that. The study was done by Dartmouth University, so we know that's a credible source, and I'll discuss it a little bit more after I take this point of information. Right, so what's a particular definition of aggressive using the study?
I gave you the specific example of an example of aggressiveness, specifically getting sent to your principal's office because you were participating in a fight at your school. So that's just an example of aggressive behavior. I also talked about risky behaviors, specifying participating in things like drug addictions or driving recklessly. And so when we look at the impact that this can have on your lives, when we take this back to the value that I gave to you of individual well-being, we see that this can actually lead to some pretty impactful things. If you participate in risky behaviors, such as having drug addictions or driving recklessly, that can have a massive impact on your life long term. Having a DUI on your record is going to impact your chances of finding a job in the future, and obviously getting into a fight and ultimately committing a crime isn't going to be so great for your life either. That leads me to the second justification, that of the opportunity cost. Again, the opportunity cost. When I say opportunity cost, that's really just a fancy way of saying a waste of time. Because when you take an action, when you spend time on something, you lose the opportunity to spend that time on something else. And that's what we call an opportunity cost. So according to Forbes in 2019, the average individual spent 7 hours a week on video games. It's So let's just do some quick math here. I'm not amazing at it or anything. I'm sure like the majority of you are probably better than me at it. But there are 52 weeks in a year, I believe, last time I checked. And that adds up to about 364 hours every single year that is spent playing video games. The minimum wage of the federal government is $7.25. And so if all this time that was just spent on video games was just spent on working a minimum wage job, these individuals would be making $2,500 more every single year. That's the specific opportunity cost, just in monetary terms, that playing video games impacts you in. And if we just look at this number of $2,500, that's a large amount of money. It can pay, I don't know, a couple months of rent or different things like that. And we see that this impact is actually even worse among children. When we talk about this 7 hours per week statistic, that's looking at including adults and including children. But according to Douglas Gentile, who's a PhD, he says that this effect is even worse among children. He did a study of 3,000 different children and saw that the average was actually 20 hours per week for children. So it's even 3 times worse. And that makes sense because children, me being one myself, have a lower sense of maturity, meaning that they have a lower ability to delay their gratification, meaning that there's a higher likelihood that they experience things like addiction. So if even just a little bit of that time was just spent on studying or something, that would drastically increase their ability to be able to do something great in the future. So the opportunity cost of spending this time on video games can have a massive impact on your life and ultimately your individual well-being. The final justification is that of economic cost. Again, economic cost. According to Braids, which is a journalism website, every year the world spends $37 billion on video games. That's not money that really goes towards doing anything, and that's money that could be better spent elsewhere. Thanks.
So Justin and I have this ritual where every time we meet up and actually go to each other's house, we play a game called FIFA, which is a soccer game. It's the basis of our friendship and really the only reason why we're friends. So our whole friendship can be attributed to a video game. Let's go ahead and go and examine this resolution to talk about, to really specify what we're going to be talking about and what the resolution actually means. It does say, on balance, video games do more harm than good. That's one thing that the government team got right. But they really misinterpreted the kind of meaning of the resolution. This can be really understood and clarified in one point, which is that it's compared to other media formats. Compared to other media formats. Because this resolution really asked us, if we were to get rid of video games, if we were to just remove them from the face of the earth, do like 2 Thanos snaps, and get rid of them, would the world be a better place or would it be worse off? The thing is, when you get rid of video games, you still have other things like TV shows and movies and other forms of just useless entertainment that people will leech their time off of and get distracted by. And so we're not necessarily looking at video games, we're not comparing video games to working more hours or winning a Nobel Peace Prize, we're comparing video games with other entertainment forms like watching movies and Netflix. This is going to be really important later on. But let's go ahead and respond to the argument they brought up about individual well-being. They said that this is the standard we should look to see whether or not video games do more harm than good. I disagree with this because we have to remember that this is an entertainment format. We're not looking at, whenever I play FIFA, I'm not trying to better myself as a person, I'm just trying to have fun and really just relax. There are other benefits to video games that we should be looking at, and the standard of individual well-being will kind of ignore that, all those other benefits. And so instead I propose a standard of quality entertainment. And quality entertainment really has 2 facets to it. In this context, is first looking at the nature of the format in comparison to other entertainment formats such as movies and TV shows, but it's also looking at the economic viability and the economic potential of the format as well. So we get the whole amount of benefits when we look through the standard of quality entertainment. With that being said, I have 2 arguments for today. The first is of quality economic benefit. Again, quality economic benefit. Now there's going to be 3 sub-points into this. The first is of the revenue. Now, when we're looking at a context where we're comparing video games to other entertainment formats like movies and TV shows, video games actually rack in more revenue than these other formats. In fact, according to the Entertainment Software Association, that video games made $2 billion more. They make $2 billion more per year than revenue compared to movies and TV shows. Yeah.
Would you say that spending money on entertainment in general is one of the best uses of your money?
Yeah, because that's kind of my argumentation. It is. I spend a lot of money on video games actually. I used to play Clash of Clans, and you have to buy a whole bunch of gems to get far in the game. And I did that, and I got bragging rights. So I think that was worth it. But anyway, they make a lot more money. In fact, Netflix even says that Fortnite is more of a threat than HBO to its business. So we see here 2 things. We see one that video games are doing better than movies in terms of revenue. But we also see that there's a direct competition between movies and video games. When you play more video games, you watch less movies. When you watch less movies and TV shows, you play less video games. That being said, let's go and move into the second subpoint under this, and that is of esports. Again, esports. Now, one of the benefits of video games that they're very marketable in a variety of different ways. And one of the ways that video games' economic potential has materialized is in the form of esports, where you see that people are playing video games competitively as a job. In fact, the last time Justin came over to my house, we watched the League of Legends final for North America. It was like Team Liquid versus Team Solo Mid. Billions of people, millions and millions of people watching this. It's this huge entertainment thing. It's become a sport in the minds of nerds like me and Justin. So it is an outlet that can go in a variety of different ways economically. The subpoint C of this is of the other industries. We see that video games actually contribute to the economic viability and potential of other industries. We see this principally in the development of virtual reality, because video game developers are trying to make virtual reality possible so that you can just put on a headset and immerse yourself in the actual video game. And what that has done, it has catapulted other industries to start using virtual reality as well. In other areas such as education, such as development of different medical technologies as well, because virtual technology is used in video games, it's actually used in other industries. We'll stop there and move to the second argument. That's of the nature of the format provides the most quality entertainment. It's kind of long, but it just simply says that video games provide the best form of quality entertainment compared to other entertainment formats. The subpoint A of this is that it's not that addicting. Again, it's not that addicting. In fact, Cardiff University says that it may not actually be even possible to be addicted to video games. We actually see here that it's much less addicting than the other entertainment formats, as Real Clear Science says that kids from ages 8 to 18 play about 73 minutes of video games per day. But they watch 4.5 hours of TV a day. So which one is worse? We can all do math here. This is a pretty obvious that the other format, the alternative to video games, is much worse and much more addictive. The subpoint B of this is that you're interacting with people. Again, you're interacting with people. Again, compare video games to other formats like just watching a TV show. When you're watching a TV show, you're just sitting on a couch and just looking ahead of you. When you're playing video games, you're moving your thumbs, you get a good thumb workout, and you also might throw things because you're mad, because you're interacting with the game, your heart's beating rapidly, you're getting invested in the whole activity. I'm actually in protected time, so I can't answer that question. And so you have this physical involvement and actual interaction. But the subpoint C is that you're actually interacting with people. Video games are like a social platform that you can actually interact with people. I use it to interact with Justin when playing FIFA. I might interact with people online playing League of Legends and other different types of games. But the thing is, when you're watching TV, you're not interacting with anybody. You're just looking ahead of you. When you're playing video games, you're interacting with a world of other gamers and developing connections and developing social skills as well. But also video games have physical benefits. We have faster reaction times, you just have smarter people, and just people who like to have fun and find the best way to relax through playing video games. Thanks.
Looks like everyone's ready. Let's get started. Our opponents are correct in saying that video games often provide lots of fun, lots of good times with friends. But what they're ignoring is all of the bad things that can happen. Because remember what this resolution is asking us. It's not to say video games are only good or only bad. It's asking us to determine whether or not they do more harm than good. We see that all of the harms that we have brought up far outweigh merely having fun. For that reason, we still support today's resolution. Let's get into some refutation of what David just said. Starting, we talked about how we should have a different weighing mechanism, which is quality entertainment. We disagree. We believe we should be using individual well-being first because it's more important. So sure, entertainment is a good thing, but it's not going to be good if you're dead or other things that can come from video games, like decreased brain activity or any of the disadvantages that we brought up before. Frankly, the idea of quality entertainment excludes its effect on the individual. It's great if we can have entertainment that has quality, but it's really bad if we can't even experience that entertainment. So we believe our weighing mechanism should still be used today. Now, let's talk about their arguments. The first was that of quality economic benefit, and they talked about revenue, esports, and other industries. Okay, so a couple blanket responses. The first is that of outweighing. So again, sure, even if these things are true, that doesn't mean that they are more important than the harms that we brought up. As we looked at this idea of violence, which was honestly never addressed, we looked at these meta-analysis that were looking at kids who were 2 times more likely to be sent to the principal's office after using video games. We see all of these things, even if just one of the violent impacts is true, it outweighs all of these other things. Because sure, revenue in esports are good, but they're not as important as these other effects on children and violence. And so to talk about revenue, my response is not necessarily good. Again, just because you're bringing in a lot of money does not mean you have a better value. To talk about esports, again, just cross-apply outweighed. And in response to their C point about other industries, response is basically a different resolution. So we're not actually advocating that we remove video games or that industry stop. What we're saying is that it does more harm than good. So our side isn't advocating for the removal of video games as an industry. It's just evaluating it and seeing what its effects are. But now, let's talk about their second major contention, which is essentially saying that it's better than other forms of media. I'm going to respond to that with our point, video games are worse comparatively. Again, video games are worse comparatively. So let's take a look at this violent media and see if their position actually holds up. I have 3 subpoints under this. The first is that of active versus passive. When we look at the difference between, say, violent TV shows and violent video games, we see a key difference. In violent video games, the participant is actually active. They're the one who shoots the gun. They're the one who takes part in this violence. Now, in a TV show, obviously that doesn't occur. This difference between actually doing the action and merely watching it makes all the difference, because what you learn is a passivity towards violence. Essentially, it becomes not that big of a deal anymore. Second subpoint is that of more likely to identify with the character. More likely to identify with the character. Now, in a movie, sure, we see people, but they're these big movie stars, right? They're not us. In video games, it is mainly first person or third person. If it's first person, you're the one who is from the perspective of the video game. You're actively shooting people or controlling people. Third person, you're also controlling it. So the difference between control is important here. Yes?
Now, what percentage of video games are actually violent?
85%. Okay. Our third C point is that of violent games award violent behavior. That's according to the American Psychological Association. Justin can talk more about that later. Our third step is that violent games award violent behavior. So if we talk about video games, what they essentially do is they give more points to people for killing people. As we all know, it's a common thing that if we are reinforced or rewarded for a behavior, then we will continue to do that behavior. So video games not only allow us to act in violence, but they reward us for that violence, therefore encouraging further violence, not only within the video game, but also in our day-to-day lives. I think this adequately addresses their contention about it not being as bad as other points, but to specifically address their C point about interacting with people, my response is not necessarily good. As Justin was telling me at the table, his interaction with David over video games isn't always civil or good, and sometimes ends in them shouting at each other. So this idea that you're interacting with people doesn't guarantee that it's a good interaction or that it's something you should be striving for. In fact, when we look back to my partner's point about opportunity cost, this could be taking away from actual physical interaction with people, not just over the screen. So we can't forget that even if you are interacting with people in video games, that means you aren't interacting with them in real life. Again, this outweighs. So we look back at these points that my partner brought up about increased violence and opportunity costs and economic costs. All of these 3 things haven't really been adequately addressed by the opposing team. What we see in the end is that sure, there can be good things about video games, it can be fun, but that's largely outweighed, as we see by the fact that the majority of video games contain violence and only encourage further violent behavior when it can become more dangerous, not just in the video game, but also in real life. Thanks.
If video games didn't exist in the world, I wouldn't be doing something productive like getting a job. I'd be sitting on my bed watching The Office. And it's really for this reason that I believe that really, on balance, video games are actually better for society. Now, their idea of quality entertainment, they talked about how basically we want to have this value of individual well-being, saying that it's more important than actually quality entertainment. The whole point of the opposition team is that if you're looking for entertainment, you're not going to be doing something else. If the time you use spending video games, you aren't going to be doing something productive if video games didn't exist. Instead, you'd find something else to do, like maybe play or watch TV or do something else. Not something productive, because when you're looking for entertainment, you aren't necessarily going to do something productive afterwards. And it's really, this is actually proven by Business Insider, or June of 2018. They said that similar questions have actually arisen with every single form of entertainment, talking about media appearances, such as TV, movies, pop music, comics, even books, essentially saying that video games should really be compared with TV, not compared with this idea of getting a job. Because in reality, if video games didn't exist, you'd be watching TV and not working a job. You're first. Yeah.
Right, so that expert included books as one of those examples, right? And do you think reading books is a better thing to do than play video
It
games?
honestly depends. Now let's go ahead and talk about this idea of outweighed, of this economic benefit. They essentially talked about this idea of violence, and they went on to talk about violence a lot more. I'm really going to be, the majority of my speech is going to be responding to this idea of violence. And we're going to have I think 5 different responses. My first response is that of no link. If we actually look to the American Psychological Association, they looked at multiple studies, essentially a meta-analysis study.